What are your expectations of the budget 2018-2019? Tonight we're speaking about matters budget, the financing and the issue of debt, and if the Big Four, how the Big Four agenda fits all into this fiscal policy paper. Joining us on studio is an economist by profession, Mr. Geoffrey Injeni. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So first, a 3.07 trillion shillings budget. Quite a mouthful.
Yes.
Quite a large sum. Let's go down to financing of it. And we're saying that KRA has been charged, or rather is going to collect 1.74 trillion shillings. The taxman has always been missing its targets. So what do you think, what tact is Rotich and his team going to apply to ensure that they actually get this money?
Well, if we look at the revised income tax, I think if you are a bit optimistic and then you're able to raise the 1.7, and then you also look at borrowing, maybe the appropriation in aid, what each ministry is supposed to raise on its own, then given some few grants, you probably will raise about 2.5 trillion, and then that's why you're left with about 560 billion to be financed. That's what they're calling the deficit. And here I think, looking at the past trends, it will be easy for the government to raise that money, maybe in terms of another Eurobond, or raising that in terms of maybe local borrowing and even from foreign borrowing. But I think the main concern then will be, don't forget that there's also about 860 billion that has been set aside to finance or to pay back the debts there.
The debts and
so
interest.
Yeah, so what will happen then is that if the government is not able to raise the 1.7 trillion from the taxes, then probably we'll have again another even more, a bigger deficit there. So my take will be, the government has to look at a way of reducing that 3 trillion, because I don't think the economy is yet ready to, to have that kind of expenditure. Yeah.
Now, let's now go bit by bit.
Yes.
The taxman has been charged with 1.74 trillion, and we've seen history repeat itself, always missing a target. And actually, statistics show that for the 2018-2019 fiscal year, it's expected to stagnate at 19.6 of GDP in terms of its collection.
Yeah.
So, does it mean, I remember when they launched into the iTax, it was meant to bring in and ensure more taxes, more revenue is collected. What does that say about the system? Is it the system or the way we actually conduct revenue collection?
Well, I think if you're looking at the past 3, 4, 5 years in terms of raising taxes for the government, there are several issues. Either a number of people are not filing their returns, despite the fact that you have iTax in place. And of course, that's why you saw recently KRA is trying to has hired a number of people to kind of look for these missing traders and people who are filing nil returns. Well, that will actually may help a bit to get some more people on board. But you also have to bear in mind that in terms of raising taxes, it's not always that people evade taxes. Sometimes it's just that people cannot pay taxes. The small businesses are not doing very well, and in fact, you could see like last year, in terms of the prolonged elections, I don't expect you to have so much coming from such businesses. But of course, there are also traders who are meant to pay tax, and they're not paying the tax. So in that case, one step will be, you can still work on strengthening the tax and revenue collection system, but then the next thing will be, are the businesses able to pay the tax? Yeah, so can they still pay the tax despite the fact that they're all on board? So that's something else again, which could be a different ballgame. And this is where you have all the arms of the government working together. For example, central bank trying to control the macroeconomic factors to make sure that businesses are doing well, and therefore they are able to pay the tax.
Now, you've mentioned something about the the review of the Kenya Income Tax Code.
Yeah.
Well, there are proponents of saying that they increase the tax base to include the informal sector instead of widening the tax bracket. What is your take? Let's first of the informal sector.
Yeah, you see, the fact is this, the Kenyan economy is largely driven by the small and medium and the Juakali sector. And for quite a while, we've been surviving on the big companies and the people who are employed to pay taxes. And if you look at the small businesses with their small struggles, probably you'll find that they'll find ways of either not paying tax, or if they want to pay tax, they will still not be able to afford. Now, probably what you have then to do is you will need to think very carefully about the different approaches you're using to collect taxes. So the first thing then will be, is everybody who's meant to pay tax on board? And that's where you improve and try to widen your net and have everybody in place. Now, the next thing then will be, if everybody who's meant to pay tax is on board, then can we check the compliance level? Why are people still opting to file, say, for example, nil returns? Because there could be a problem with that. And even if you're able to pay the tax, can you still talk about that tax being enough to support maybe your current kind of expenditures? Because again, you have to realize that, if you're employed and you're earning a salary amount of X, but your lifestyle is so huge, despite the fact that you may want to increase some of your revenue streams, that can also be questioned. So sometimes it's not just an issue of bringing everybody on board. You can have everybody on board, but people will now tell you, sorry, I can't pay tax. I can't afford.
So what are you saying? Are you supporting the widening of the tax base to rope in the informal sector, given that currently the informal sector contributes almost 35% to the GDP? Yes. Do we then need to redefine who falls into the category of the informal sector? Because currently as it stands, this is a business or a person who makes close to 5 million per year. That means 450 per month, 150 in profit. That doesn't certainly fit Mama Mboga that we're trying to empower.
Yeah, and that's why I've just mentioned here that a very good system is one that identifies all potential taxpayers. That is the first step. Then the next step is to identify the ability of these people to pay tax. So it's good to know, probably even churches, who can pay tax. That's a very good step forward. Then the next thing then will be, can you pay this tax? And that is why for such small and medium-sized entities, you will then have to design some form of tax that does not hurt their business, but you can still get something little from them. So that in a way you support what they're doing. In fact, I've seen people who say that if you're doing a harambe, even the poorest of them all is ready to give something small because that is their ability to do that.
We look at it as a harambe. Now let us look at the role. What role should the counties actually play in revenue collection?
Yeah, of course. You see, the good thing with devolution is that you're able to serve or provide services to the people at the closest possible level. That also means that in a way you can be able to identify these potential taxpayers. So for example, people who are running their small businesses. In this case, you can be able to reach out to everybody. As you provide the service, you're also able to identify who can pay tax. So that, in a way, counties can help with the data and knowing how many people, how economic empowered we are. And in that case, I think if you're looking at counties raising their own revenues, in a way then you may have to reduce the amounts you allocate to the counties in some way, because at the moment counties are relying a lot on the central government, and that also, increasing the amount of expenditures there. But if the counties are able to identify the people who can pay taxes at the local level, but again do it in a way that is, you know, it's easy to raise revenue from somebody you're also giving good service. So,
no,
yeah.
Well, that is that. Now, from where you sit, just in an overview, do you think we're going to have sin tax increase? This is usually a soft spot whenever we're talking about budgeting to raise more revenue. Okay. Is that going to be touched this likely?
Yeah, you see, like I also explained, when you look at the different types of taxes, you know, the PAYE, excess tax, the custom duties, and all those taxes, you'll also have to remember that there's a limit to which they can actually operate. So, for example, if you're talking about taxing beer, cigarettes, the juices, and others, the problem that you'll have is that if you put in too much tax on beer, what people will do is then is they'll resolve to go to the cheap ones. So in that case, you still miss the intended effect. But I think if you ask me, actually, sin tax is not supposed to be used as a major source of revenue for the government, but rather is to discourage certain habits. So in that case, we don't use sin tax as our source of revenue because it will collapse on us. So in this case, let's encourage people to do, let's say if you don't want to have many cancer patients, then discourage people from smoking cigarettes, but don't put in tax there so that you try to collect more money there, because that will have a negative effect.
Now, we can't talk about the budget and not look at, if you're talking about financing, now let us look at the debt. And I think, should we be worried? I remember this is a question that we were asking. If this deficit, the 560 point something billion shillings deficit, where most likely is Treasury going to be seeking? Is it external or internal? And what will be the ratio?
Well, at the moment, when Treasury is trying to raise the monies, especially from the central bank's perspective, you remember that this time they floated the Eurobond. Probably you had so many banks also applying for the money, and that was easy. And that was because from the bank's perspective, if you cap the interest rates, all right, so it means that the banks cannot lend to other people at a higher rate, but also you have other people having more risk. So in this case, if the bank, if the government decides to borrow more money from you know, wananchi and all that, the government will still easily raise that because even the banks and other lenders will lend the government because the government is a low risk kind of borrower.
So you are advocating for us to borrow, look internally?
You can borrow that internally, but also don't forget that you also have a lot of foreign investors who are interested with lending the government. So in this case, I doubt whether the government cannot be able to raise the monies, but what my concern will then be is to what use are we putting this debt here? Because don't forget that every little thing that you borrow, you'll have to pay back at an interest. So don't borrow 1 shilling and then you're paying back 1 shilling and say 20 cents, but then we cannot see the effect of that. So the idea then is that over the next, or in the midterm, we must look at a way of reducing our borrowing because already now we are spending more than about 860 billion having to pay back these debts.
Now, this budget has been tailored to support the Big Four agenda.
Yes.
Apart from the Big Four agenda, the manufacturing, the value addition in agriculture and health, which other areas are likely to benefit more, or these 5 are going to generate development across board?
Well, if you're looking at having a strong agenda about the Big Four, I think one of the things that we need to be very careful with is that currently Kenya is not just concerned with the Big Four, the manufacturing and you know, food security and health, but we also have quite a number of things that need to come in. For example, like, do we have infrastructure that is supporting the Big Four? So I think we might see some of the monies going towards still promoting education, because I know there's the issue of trying to build capacity for most counties in terms of higher education. And of course, we can't leave behind infrastructure, because without infrastructure, then there are certain dreams that will not be realized. Don't forget that with the recent floods, and quite a number of roads have been damaged, and so we've seen that. So that's another area that we really need to be very focused on. And definitely, if you're looking at supporting more devolution, because devolution has the ability also to drive development, and that's why you see recently issues about counties coming up very clearly. So I think infrastructure, education, even investing in security to promote tourism, because which is a very good source of income for us. These are areas that must also benefit from the current budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we had asked you tonight, what are your expectations over the budget 2018-2019? If you may, let me just look one at Twitter, just see if you... James Lena says, okay, my expectations is that I hope there may be a difference following the previous, or rather the latest budget. I urge the budget committee to consider the marginalized sector and businesses. That is one thought from one person that on Twitter. Then there's someone who's saying here, I hope that this budget also considers lowering the cost of living for Kenyans, especially transport and foodstuffs. Those are concerns for Kenyans as it is. Well, keep SMSing, keep tweeting at 22162, and also we're going to be sampling that in the course of our bulletin. But now we cannot fully exhaust what the budget is all about, so be sure to tune in on the 14th, when we expect the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich to be presenting this 2018-2019 budget, and we're sure going to be having such a great conversation here with stakeholders and also experts in the field. But now let us look at stories that are further making headlines in the business circles. Is that David Ansell has been appointed Equity Group Holdings Chairman Designate to take over from the founder Chairman Peter Munga, who has retired after attaining the age of 75. Well, the lender says Munga, who has chaired the Equity Group's board since 1984, will work collaboratively with Ansell to ensure a smooth transition is completed by the next time the AGM is held in 2019. The firm says Munga has seen Equity Group grow from a rural building society when only 2% of the Kenyan population had access to banking services to become the current market leader, with an asset base of 528 billion shillings and with a footprint of in 6 countries. While Ansell, who was first appointed as a director of Equity Bank in 2012, has been the non-executive vice chairman of the Equity Group Holdings. In his working career, Ansell has served in various assignments at Citibank, including 16 years in Africa. We have been talking about matters budget, and allow me not to release my guest without him answering the question. What are your expectations for the budget 2018-2019?
Well, like I've said again, I think the government's focus now is on the big four, but I also expect the government also to bear in mind that the economy is just coming from election and some bit of issues that came up with the election. But I believe that in addition to the big four, infrastructure will be very important. Possibly expect the government to think about controlling their recurrent expenditures, especially the wage bill. I think that's something that may need to be addressed in some context. And of course, I will also expect the county governments to get some bit of support, although that budget will really have to bear in mind that there are a lot of challenges ahead. Yeah, with that. Very well said. That has been our guest tonight here in the studio, Mr. Geoffrey Injeni, who is an economist by profession, a faculty and a consultant of Strathmore University.